Well, class, as you saw in the introduction, there are far too many times in this country where guns have been used to hurt people. But there are also many times, as you saw in the introduction, where guns have been used to stop people from hurting one another. And so the question arises, when it comes to guns, are they critical to our freedom or are they harmful? Are they a fundamental right, or is the idea of owning a gun an outdated principle? Besides the numerous tragedies, and some of which we've already discussed already, proponents of gun control, in other words, when the government puts regulations on the buying and selling of guns, note that guns simply make it too easy for society to hurt themselves and others. Miriam Wright Elderman of the Children's Defense Fund noted that every year roughly 29,000 citizens die from gun violence, and roughly 3,000 of them are children that are killed accidentally. They point to the numerous tragedies from Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut to Columbine, which we discussed in the introduction. They also point to the fact that the states who are more open with gun access have a higher percentage of murders than those states with more gun control. And proponents of gun control take issue with the fact that guns are simply too accessible in many parts of the country. Take Columbine, for example, which I talked about. How is it that two teenagers were able to gain access to submachine guns, or in the Giffords shooting, when a Congressman Giffords was shot, how an individual that was diagnosed with a mental health issue was able to gain access to a gun? Proponents of gun control argue that without background checks and registration of guns, a known criminal can walk into any gun store and buy a gun, and they will intentionally use on others. They also argue that because guns are easily accessible in the country, there are a plethora of guns that are sold in the black market. Lastly, gun control advocates want certain types of guns banned completely, particularly assault rifles that the military uses and handguns, which are not effective in hunting or sporting. However, the biggest issue that gun advocates put forth in response to gun control is the Second Amendment of the Constitution. The text of the amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Notice there that the emphasis is on the right of the people, not the right of the government or a militia. So the framers definitely had in mind the fact that ordinary citizens should hold guns. In the minds of the framers, one ability to keep and bear arms was necessary in order for the country. It was newly created at the time and had to defend itself from possible invaders, be it the Spanish, French, or British, all of which were real possibilities in the 1790s. In fact, when the Revolutionary War broke out, the British first went after Americans' guns. However, there was also other components to the amendment. Remember, the framers were very concerned with limited government, and putting any checks on power in government was a benefit. And since government always had the tendency to abuse its power, even in America, if its citizens could not bear arms and defend itself, the government would have have an easier time abusing their power. It would mean that the government could easily force citizens to do whatever they want, even if it was immoral or unlawful, because they had force to do so. Because of the other checks that government has on it, this may seem far-fetched, but at the heart of the gun advocate argument is one for defense, and this is something I want to emphasize a little bit more. In the minds of the framers and gun advocates, individuals should have the right to defend themselves, be it from the government, from another government, or, more often in today's society, from other citizens. Gun rights advocates argue that gun control doesn't really work anyway. Criminals don't care about breaking a law, hence why they're criminals. They're going to obtain a gun if they want to use it, and they're going to use it to hurt others. Why shouldn't a law-abiding citizen have the right to defend themselves from such criminals? They also point to the fact that gun control hasn't been effective at stopping crime. For example, California has some of the most difficult and stringent or strict laws on gun ownership, yet they had the most amount of gun deaths in the entire nation. In Chicago, where they tried to ban handguns altogether, The murder rate is currently an all-time high, and you're more likely to die from gunfire in Chicago than you are in Afghanistan, which is a war zone. In short, at least 50% of American households have one or more guns in their house, and there are over 150 million guns in law-abiding citizens' hands. However, frankly, you're more likely to die from cancer or heart disease than you are by someone using a gun. So what is the government's dilemma? The Constitution guarantees the right to bear arms. But does that mean it protects all types of guns? Can or should a citizen, for example, be able to buy an automatic rifle or a high caliber sniper rifle that's capable of taking out a tank even? Is that really what the framers had in mind? Second, the government has to abide by the rule of law, yet they also had a responsibility of keeping citizens safe. Does restricting guns do this? Some evidence would say yes, and some evidence would frankly say no. And lastly, the Second Amendment at its heart allows citizens to defend themselves. It's not to regulate a militia, it's for self-defense. And is not self-defense a basic human right? In other words, should you have to run and hide, or should you be able to defend yourself when threatened by someone else? We'll explore this issue a little bit further in the extended thinking. Please move on to that and look forward to having this discussion.